A Lover of the Cross, Sadhu Sundar Singh, dated 1917. Chapter 3, Sundar's first tour as a sadhu. Sundar's first tour began about a month after his baptism at Simla. After a month's retreat at Spatu, he came to Cathcart, and from here he set out on a long march through several villages in the district, staying a night or two in each place and preaching the gospel to any and everyone that came in his way. A Night with the Serpent. Touring through several places one evening, he came to a place called Daliwala, D-O-L-I-W-A-L-L-A. After the day's long march, Sundar was quite weary and exhausted. Entering the village, he called at several houses and shops, asking shelter for the night. But on discovering that he was a Christian, Sadducee, that's S-A-N-Y-A-S-I, everyone refused to help him in any way. It was a cold night, and the rain was falling heavily. Besides, he was too wet and tired to stand anymore knocking about in the dingy streets. Hence, arriving at an old, dilapidated house, he made straight for the door and went inside. The house consisted of a couple of rooms, one above the other, though with its tumbled-down walls, shattered windows, doors off their hinges, and the roof fallen in, it could hardly be called a house, and much less promise any comfort or shelter to a weary wayfarer. However, this was the best that Sundar could get, and so he thanked God for giving him the same. Going inside, he singled out the cleanest possible spot, and spreading his only blanket on the damp, smelly floor, Sundar lay himself down to rest for the night. Weary and fatigued as he was, he soon fell asleep and slept soundly till the next day. In the morning, when he woke from his sound sleep, he saw a black cobra. Footnote from the reader: a black cobra can kill a person with one bite in 15 minutes or less. End of footnote from the reader. Lying coiled up on the blanket under his very arm, Sundar's heart quailed within him and, quote, shook like the pinion, P-E-N-N-O-N, of a lance, unquote, on seeing this ghastly sight. Flinging his blanket aside, he rushed away to the door for all he was worth. Perspiration stood in large drops on his brows as he stood panting outside the door, looking wistfully at the snake. But presently he began to feel greatly mortified at his distrust of God's providence, who had kept him safe through the night. Re-entering the house, he shook the snake off the blanket and quietly strolled out of the room. Strange to say, the cobra, instead of turning upon Sundar to attack him, quietly crawled into a corner of the room and seemed quite unmindful of the interference. Sundar felt greatly ashamed of his disbelief in the divine providency and went away from the place strengthened in faith and feeling safe in his keeping. A wonderful teacher. Touring in the Punjab, Sundar was once on his way to Meerut, M-E-E-R-U-T. The day was hot and the sun shone bright overhead. Sundar, not very much used to walking long distances on the plains, soon became tired and footsore. So in order to take a little rest, he sat down on a heap of concrete by the roadside. Presently he saw a simple, poor-looking man with a sheep following him coming along the road. Reaching the heap of concrete whereon Sundar was sitting, the man also sat down on the opposite end and began to fondle and embrace his lamb in a very affectionate way. Taking him for an ordinary traveler, Sundar at first did not take much notice of him. But when he saw him love his lamb so affectionately, he could not help going to the man and asking him what made him love his little lamb so very fondly. To this the man replied, "The sheep is a wonderful animal, for it teaches us humility, meekness, and obedience. It will always follow its master. It recognizes his voice and has a great affection for him." Sundar was rather amazed at hearing a rough, boorish-looking man speak such words of wisdom and admonition, and so, as the man got up and started on his way, Sundar also quietly followed him at a distance. Trying to overtake him, Sundar hurried his pace, but he was surprised to notice that however fast he walked, he came no nearer to the man who walked at an unvaried pace. Arriving at a little thicket by the roadside, the man and the sheep both hid themselves behind it. Sundar, who was not very far away, soon arrived at the spot and saw that neither the man nor the sheep were anywhere to be found, neither under the bush nor for miles around. I am at a loss to tell, says Sundar, where the man disappeared, but I am fully persuaded that he was some angel of God who had been sent for my instruction. For the words he spoke went down home to my heart, and I learned such a lesson on humility and meekness as I shall never forget all my life. God ruleth the hearts. Touring through a number of villages and towns in the Punjab, Sundar entered Afghanistan, the home of the plethoric P-A-T-H-A-N, Pathan, that burly, red-faced race of men with whom treachery is a point of honor and cold-blooded cruelty a habit. One day as he entered the historic town of Jalalabad, Jallalabad, some Pathans took him for a spy and plotted to murder him. Now here is a wonderful incident in which the ways of God works and saves and protects his chosen servants who leave themselves entirely in his hands. Sundar knew nothing of the plot that had been hatched against him and was carelessly sitting in an inn when one of the inhabitants of the village came and told him that his life was in danger and that he had better leave the place before evening. At first, Sundar hesitated to believe what the Pathan said, P-A-T-H-A-N, but then feeling inwardly persuaded that it was God's will that he should leave the place, he did so and traveled across to another one in the near vicinity. Arriving here, Sundar could get no proper place for shelter, and so he spent the night in a dingy old sari, S-A-R-A-I, full of bugs and mosquitoes. The next morning when he got up and sat drying his clothes against the fire, he saw a mob of Pathans, P-A-T-H-A-N-S, coming towards him. Now, thought he, my time has come, and the people will never let me go alive. But wonderful was the way in which God changed their hearts. As the mob arrived at the house, one of them came forward, fell at Sundar's feet, and said, "Please forgive our rudeness, for we had come with the intention of murdering you. But now we understand that you are a chosen one of Allah." Footnote. Arabic word for God. End of footnote. "We had expected to find you either frozen to death or caught with some serious disease. But here you are all hale, H-A-L-E, and hearty, as though you had not suffered any trouble." After the man had finished speaking, the whole crowd came and sat round him, and shortly afterwards escorted him to their village. Here they offered Sundar the best of their hospitality, and entertained him better than they do their own priest, M-U-L-L-A-H-S, and what was more, listened to the preaching of the gospel with great interest and reverencing. On his departure from their midst, they all looked very sad and presented him with a new turban and a K-U-R-T-A as a token of their true love and reverency for him. "The week that I spent with these Pantheons," says Sundar, "I have always looked upon as one of the happiest and most useful times of my life, and I feel confident that the seed sown there will one day bear much fruit, and that the time will soon come when many people will openly confess his name." Sundar learns a great lesson. Finishing his tour through Afghanistan, Sundar entered Kashmir and preached the gospel in the midst of many trials and temptations. Famished and exhausted, one day he worked his toilsome way to a certain town called Kushtwar, Kushtwar. Entering the town, he went to a place where there was a huge crowd of men and women gathered round an oven, baking bread on a flat earthen plate. Nearing the crowd, Sundar heard it remarked that the center of the baking plate always remained cold, with the result that all bread that fell on the spot remained unbaked. All that were greatly astonished at this. Presently a small superscription was raised to defray the cost of the baking plate, which was soon broken open, and in its center they discovered a large flat insect, which began to wriggle and soon came out of the plate. All were amazed at this, says Sundar, but I was overcome with a feeling of great self-abasement. On my way to Kushtwar, I was so hungry and tired that I often doubted the advisability of my suffering so many hardships and trials for nothing when he seemed to be so careless about it all. The day I learned a great lesson and determined that henceforth I would never again doubt the divine providence or question his will. Kotgarth, Kotgarh, Sundar's resting station. Footnote from the reader. Geographical coordinates of this city is 31 degrees by 19 by 0 north by 77 degrees 29 0 east. Its original name is Kotgarh. End of the footnote by the reader. After his long march through Afghanistan, Kashmir, and northern Punjab, Sundar rounded up his first tour at Kotgarh, the place from which he had started. Kotgarh, Kotgarh, has since then become a kind of final halting station for Sundar. Almost every year, after months of hard and toilsome work on the plains, he spends a few weeks in this lovely embracing spot, resting and recouping his exhausted energy. For on the plains he is so full up with work that sometimes he finds it impossible even to read the Bible before beginning his day's work. Kotgarh is a small village of some importance, which nestles picturesquely in the bosom of the great Himalayas, about 50 miles from Simla, and an elevation of nearly 700 feet from the sea level. Footnote from the reader. The actual spelling for us is Shimla. It is located in the northwest ranges of the Himalayan, 31.61 degrees north, 77.10 degrees east, with an average altitude of 2,397.5 meters or 7,866 feet above the mean sea level. End of the footnote on Simla from the reader. The village boasts of a DAK, bungalow, and a post office, and is a stage on the Grand Tibetan Road, which leads right into the beautiful valley of the Sutlej. It is also a mission station of some consequence, which is run by the Punjab branch of the Church Missionary Society. The oftener one goes to Kotgarh, the more conscious one becomes of the many unheeded opportunities of winning these parts for Christ. The work, it must be admitted, is far from easy, nor do we mean to underrate it in the face of such a startling fact as this, that the past 75 years of missionary labor in these parts have resulted in the baptism of only 30 or 35 of the natives in these parts. There may be difficulties which are perhaps beyond the ken of the average observer, and yet there is no denying that fact that the place has not been looked upon as a center of real missionary activity for many years. The missionary here is more of a manager of the fruit farm than an evangelist or even a pastor. Footnote from the reader. Kotgarh has been known for many years as being a place of apple cultivation. End of the footnote from the reader. If this is not true, then why is it that the society never sends a young energetic, permanent missionary instead of a mere birds of passage, who, when they become too worn out or antiquated for any other mission station, are shunted or here to have a haven of rest? Kotgarh better deserves to be known as the convalescent ward of the missionary, as it hardly deserves the name of field. For besides the sermon on Sunday, a monthly celebration, and a biennial baptism, the missionary has not much more to do, and the rest of his heavy hanging hours are spent in dressing his fruit and settling endless disputes with his fellow workers. The inhabitants of these parts are perhaps the lowest type of human being which descend to the nethermost rung of the religious ladder of Hinduism. Superstition and ignorance has been their heritage of ages. Woefully backward in civilization, they live under conditions morally and physically deleterious. The squander and the moral bankruptcy of these degenerate people is shocking to humanity. Their religion is the lowest type of idol worship. They worship numerous deities and live a life of servile fearfulness and revengeful dread of offended spirits. The country abounds with local tales, haunted spots, twilight superstitions, and dancing DEWTAS, demons of all shapes and dimensions. Sundar's meeting with Mr. Stokes. It was at Kothgard that Sundar became acquainted for the first time with Mr. Stokes, Stokes, who was then staying at Bareri, a house about 2 miles from Kothgard. Mr. Stokes, footnote from the reader, Mr. Stokes, Stokes, his initials are A as in apple, period, E as in Edward, period. Footnote from the reader, Mr. S as in Sam, E as in Echo. Last name is spelled Stokes. End of the footnote from the reader. Mr. Stokes, who is probably known to a good many of our readers, had a short time been working in connection with the SPG mission at Delhi. He had left home with the passion, quote, to serve his Indian brothers, unquote, and bring them to the Master. Shortly after his interview with Sundar the Sadhu, he felt convinced in his heart that the best way of serving India was by becoming a Sadhu. Shortly afterwards, he felt distinctly called to serve India as a friar. The call was readily heard in a spirit of true earnestness and zeal, and presently obeyed. A few days later, the rich millionaire of America was seen trampling on foot over the hills, bareheaded, barefooted, and with only one long garment on the body and a cross around his neck. The love of God had constrained him to leave the world and follow him. And now, strengthened by his strength and upheld by his power, fearless of disease or death, he accompanied Sundar on a tour through the villages of the Kothgard district. Quote, many were the hardships and troubles that we had to put with in this tour, and yet, unquote, says Sundar, quote, we were both very happy and cheerful, and rejoiced to think that we were suffering for him who suffered for us on the cross, unquote. Joy and trouble. Winding their way through a number of villages, the two Sadhus one day arrived at a place called Chandi. According to their custom, they spent the day in telling the people about Jesus Christ, and in the evening went about in search of food and shelter. By that time, almost everyone in the village had come to know that the two Sadhus were Christians, and so no one would allow them even to touch their houses, much less let them in for the night. Left to their own resources, the two Sadhus went into the public Serai inn. Those who have experience of the hills know that these inns are like, besides being full of bugs and sand flies, the thick layer of mud carpeted the floor, and a stupefied stench perverted the whole place. In a place like this, sleep was absolutely out of the question. Although the Sadhus had been walking and working hard during the day, were sometimes overwhelmed with sleep, but cold and hunger soon drove it away. Although our bodies, said Sundar, were in very great trouble and pain, yet there was a strange, unaccountable joy in our hearts which seemed to pervade our whole being over and over again. Our hearts poured forth torrents of melody, and soon they spent the whole night in alternate praying and psalm singing. The memorable night at Jhoki. Once again, the two Sadhus arrived at a village called Jhoki. Like the rest of their countrymen, the people in this place, too, were woefully ignorant and superstitious, so they refused to do anything in the way of helping the poor Sadhus. However, one of the farmers allowed them to stay the night in the veranda of his house. This was little better than staying out in the open, for the verandas was quite unprotected, and there was nothing to stop the chilly wind cutting their faces. Seeing their miserable condition, the master of the house took pity on them, and as a great favor gave them 2 dirty, smelly mats to cover themselves with. Being grateful to get what they could, the Sadhus used them for covering their barely clad bodies and saved themselves from being frozen to death. The next morning when they got up, they had nothing to eat, nor could they expect to get anything from the villagers. However, after a lot of entreating, the same man who had given the mats for their covering brought them some coarse, dry bread. Mr. Stokes says Sundar, although I have been treated to some of the daintiest and most scrumptious meals in America, yet I cannot think of one single one which I enjoyed and relished half so much as I have this dry bread. After a few months' tour together in the hills, the two Sadhus returned to Kothgard. Mr. Stokes decided on a short furlough at home, left for America, while Sundar went down to the plains and spent a few months working in the leper asylum at Spatu, S-P-A-T-U, and the Punjab plague camp at La Sore. End of chapter 3 have been read by Peter John Paresis.